Thank you, Jam people all over the world. I'm especially excited to be here to talk about Leaders Lead during a pandemic. I want to tell you about an early leadership crisis that I had, which is early on. I built Sesame Street Elmo's Preschool. This is during the 90s. And I was a co-founder of a kids software company called Creative Wonders. And I went on to build lots of Sesame Street software. And then I also built Schoolhouse Rock software, as well as Arthur the Aardvark and Madeline the Little French Girl software. And during that time, I wasn't a muckety-muck. I wasn't a VP. And the Creative Wonders, my company, kept hiring a new VP of product for me, and they never worked out. And finally, the CEO of the company, Greg Bestick, came to me and said, "Hey, Gib, we'd like to take a shot at making you the leader, but." And the but had something to do with this, which is I loved going out and windsurfing on the San Francisco Bay every day. This is me sailing in front of Alcatraz. And I'd come back to work at 6 o'clock in shorts and flip-flops, and I'd stink like the bay. So I wasn't a typical leader. And the but from Greg was that he said, "Hey, Gib, leadership is totemic." And he read a book a day. He had quite a vocabulary. I'm like, totemic, totem pole, symbolic. Leadership is symbolic. And what he was nicely saying to me was to be a leader, I had to clean up my act. I had to wear pants, and I had to clean up my cube and all of those kinds of things. And he said, "I want you also to go out and have lunch and dinner with all the other execs, because I know you and I know you can deliver results. But you just have to embrace that the leadership and clean up your act." And so I became the VP of product. And about 2 weeks later, Greg came to me and said, the Learning Company, this is the biggest company in the educational software arena, wants to buy us. And I think it's a good offer. So I'd like you to spend some time with Kevin O'Leary, who is the CEO of the Learning Company. And for those who don't know, the Learning Company made Reader Rabbit software, Oregon Trails. I'm older than dirt to know that I worked on Oregon Trails as something. And the CEO of the company, his name is Kevin O'Leary. And some of you may recognize him because this is Mr. Wonderful from Shark Tank. And so here I am. I've just become a leader, and he's interviewing me, and he's trying to tire kick the company to see if they should buy us. And at some point he said, "Hey, Gib, how long have you been the VP of product?" I'm like, 10 days. He said, "Okay." And there was more to this, which is, it turned out that we got bought, but something else was a bit of a crisis for me in a new VP product role. The company wanted us to move from our office in Redwood City, this is in the San Francisco Peninsula, all the way over to their mothership, which is Fremont. And that was extending the commute by 27 minutes. And that was bad, right? And worse, Greg Bestick, my CEO, is an introvert. He doesn't really like talking in big groups, especially about bad news. And so he said, "I'd love you to deliver the message." Now, the company was 150 people and 120 were in product. So most of the folks that were within my organization. So I thought about this sort of long and hard and how would I deliver this news? And there I am standing up in an all hands meeting with this bad news. And I started with the two words that are the least inspiring in the world, which is, "Hey, team, I want you to be ambivalent." And I'm an English major, and I said, hey, ambivalent doesn't mean in the middle. It means there are some amazing and exciting things that will happen, and there's also some changes and some stuff that's going to suck. So the good news is we're becoming part of this bigger company, and we'll have more resources, and our software will be used by everybody around the world. But the bad news is there's going to be some change. In fact, we're going to have to move our office. And this is where, as a leader, I told a little story and to help provide context for how to think about this. Now, back in those days, I had 2- and 4-year-old daughters. They love pets. I'm allergic to everything. I've got asthma. And the only pet we could get were fish. And we'd kill one a week. So we'd go to the fish store. And I always remember the fish store dude saying, hey, here's the baggie. Carry it home. And don't just dump it in. Lower in the water. Let the fish acclimate. And then pull out the baggie. And in doing this, I announced the fishbowl acquisition strategy at Creative Wonders. I said, hey, we're going to go over there. The first 6 months, we're going to have our own space, our own building. We're going to just get used to it. And after 6 months, we're going to pull the baggie. And from that point on, everybody would sort of almost enthusiastically talk about the fishbowl acquisition strategy. And guess what? It worked. We helped the learning company to grow up. And eventually we sold ourselves to Mattel. It's like a big deal. It's a $4 billion acquisition. This is how Mr. Wonderful made his money. So I just wanted to have you start thinking about how, as leaders, how do you navigate crises like these during a pandemic? By background, you can see I was doing kids bang bang shoot 'em up software at EA. I talked about the kids stuff. I was at Netflix starting in 2005. And then in the last 5 years, I've been focused on being a teacher, which is really what I love to do, but also being an advisor to lots of different startups. And so what I wanted to talk about today is this concept that leaders lead. And that was a phrase that we would use as exec team members whenever we had to take on some big challenge, like announcing that we were having to move across the bay. It's just your job. And there's 3 chapters from my story. The first is I'm going to define what I mean by leadership. The second is I'm going to tell you my very personal pandemic story. And then I'm going to abstract some things that I hope will help all of us to lead through crisis based on my experience in all these startups and companies that I work with in parallel. So here I am on to the first chapter, if you will. I want to define leadership. And I have a very simple definition. This is April Underwood. Until about a year ago, she was the product leader at Slack. I'm sure most of you are using her product today. But my definition is quite simple. It's an inspired communication of a vision. It helps point everyone in that future direction that you want to go. And then I want you to think for a moment about what are the skills of a product leader. And I've brought up a totemic product leader, Steve Jobs. And I want you to think for a moment, what are his skills, or what are the skills that I need as a product leader? And I interview candidates, VP of products all the time. And I'll start by putting these 6 words up on a whiteboard. And I'll nicely ask people to force rank. What are you strong in and what are you weak in? And of course, they always ask me the first question, what do you mean by each of these words, Gib? So I let them know. Now, you know my definition of leadership. But at management, as you develop into a leader, it's all about hiring and developing teams. And then my definition of strategic thinking, it's your ability to form theories and hypotheses, product strategies that will help to delight customers in these hard to copy, margin enhancing ways. And then as leaders, we can't be followers. We need to be intensely proactive and results oriented. Do whatever it takes to help the company to navigate that next level or that next change. And then there's a softer side to leadership, which for me is all about culture. And I love culture because culture, if everybody in an organization understands the values of a company, they can make great decisions without even talking to each other. And that creates this very light process for making key decisions. Talented people, highly creative people, they don't like to be told what to do and how to do it. And culture is sort of the antidote to process. And then business maturity, over time you develop great judgment around people, product, and the business. And sadly for me, it's not quite as correlated with age as I had hoped. So these are the skills of a leader. And you've got substantial tools. And so I'm just going to give you the toolkit that you have to work with. The first is you have a hand in articulating the mission, the vision, and a definition of the brand. What does that product want to be when it grows up? And then the substantial tool is you can set the product strategy, metrics that help measure whether those strategies are working, and then tactics or projects. These are all defined in a plan. And then you have a hand in building the organization and how it's designed. How do people interact with each other? And then you have management systems. So a simple management system, I'll have a weekly one-on-one, and I might have a weekly team meeting, but I also do other things like quarterly product strategy meetings, which help people to think about the long term. And we all have different systems here. And then I've talked about the importance of culture. But at the end of the day, the last tool that you have as a leader is really through your own example. And that's what Greg Bestick was saying to me when he encouraged me to wear shoes and stop, take a shower, gosh darn it. And so you have a responsibility as a leader to provide an example of the behaviors and skills that you expect throughout the whole organization. So I want to tell you my pandemic story. This is an image from March 7th when I drove from Utah to San Francisco. I hustled back to San Francisco to fly to London. And I just want to talk quickly about how the pandemic affected me. And this is my family. That's Kristen on the left. She's a physician scientist, and she works for Bristol Myers Squibb, a big biotech. That's Kelsey. She's going to go to med school. There's Britt. She is an associate product manager at Rent the Runway in New York City. You can rent dresses instead of buy them. And then I am the awkward 58-year-old white male. And I just want to acknowledge my privilege. I've had lots of good luck and opportunity. But my hope is to pass on things that I've learned that'll make things easier for you. So my little one-person company, I'm just going to give you a very personal experience that about my one company, and then I'll abstract it for lessons that'll be helpful to you. So I've been doing talks like this for 3 years. At the beginning, my first year, I did 50 free talks. I would talk to anybody who would listen. And then the next year, I did 100 talks. And actually, I started to figure out how business worked. I would get paid for 15. And then in 2019, I did 100 talks and workshops, which is a lot. I flew like 200,000 miles on United, and 30 of them were paid. And then in 2019, I also did 10 online talks, but 10. I usually would do it as a warm-up because I was doing a workshop. I visited 10 countries last year. That was my way to meet folks. And then in 2020, my plan was pretty simple. 100 talks a year is crazy. I was going to scale down to 80. And then I was going to aspire to do 40 paid things. I was more known. This was the plan. And then this happened, okay? All heck broke loose. And I want to tell you how it unfolded for me. Tail end of February, my wife, Kristen, and I got on the phone. We talked with Kelsey. Kelsey stopped working. She's going to go back to school. And her plan was to get yoga certification in Bali. And we're like, does that make sense? And we looked, there were 0 cases in Bali. But after discussion, we said, we don't know what's going to happen, but it's probably good to stay with a US-based health system. And so at the last minute, she swapped, and she was upset, but it was her decision as well. She switched to Maui, okay? And then I hustled off. I went to Dublin on March 9th, and there was debate about whether that made sense. But at the time, you could have 1,000 people congregated in Ireland. I showed up there. People are beginning to, they're not handshaking. They're doing Purell and washing their hands all the time. And stuff was fine. And I did a big talk in Dublin on the 10th, and then a big workshop on the 11th. And then I slid over to London. And London was different. People were still shaking hands. The cafes, the bars, the restaurants were full. I was really quite surprised because I had a workshop for 60 people the very next day, Thursday the 12th. And I'm at the Citizen M, and 2 in the morning, my wife calls. And I wake up, and I was disoriented. And she said, Gib, you got to get on the next plane back. Just call United and get on the 7 a.m. in the morning. And I was disoriented. I said, hey, but Kristen, I've got a 60-person workshop. I can't cancel at the last minute. And she's like, Gib, they shut down the NBA. There's no more basketball. The world has changed. And of course, I was rejecting the notion. But I did it. And I hopped on the plane. I canceled everything. And this is the life I returned to, recalled both Kels and Britt. We felt good about bringing Britt back from New York City, especially. But this has been my life for the last 2 months. And I was mopey. I had a plan. I had stuff set up for the whole entire year, the countries that I was eager to visit. And finally, I kind of came out of my shell on March 20th and just started thinking, okay, what is my new life going to be? And this is 5 minutes from my home. This is where I am right now. I have awesome internet, a requirement at a friend's work. So this was my plan. That was then. And then I said that this is now, is I'm going to actually go from 80 all the way up to 120 talks and workshops. And the real reality was I needed more cycles to learn about online, but I also wanted to be helpful to the product community. So I feel like I am a symbol and leader in the product community, and what's the right thing to do? So fundamentally, I do a lot of free talks stuff trying to be helpful to the community. And my plan was 20 online talks, and I went to 100. That is the current plan. I've done 37 so far, right? And then my hope is if I do 120 talks and workshops, I'll get paid for 40. And if you want to know about my financial life, I'm transparent on my fees. You can visit my little baby website. But most of the work I do is for the good of the world, trying to be helpful. And guess what happened? January, February, March, this is my traffic from my baby website, and went whoosh up and to the right, okay? 5,000 visitors in a month. Kind of fun. Didn't suck anymore. And then this is me looking at where the heck is the traffic coming from? Like, okay, I'm in the United States, Alaska, that makes sense. Canada, cool. Brazil, cool. But I was looking at that country in the middle of Africa. I'm like, what's up with that? And that is Nigeria. And this is the fun thing. In the old world, I was trying to be more worldly. In this new world, I actually find that I'm much more worldly. I was talking with Mathilde. We were doing something in Lisbon, and I was concluding the call. I said, I have to go off to Nigeria. She's like, what? Like, no, I'm doing an online talk there. And it's really great fun. So this is my experience. I reached out on a Monday of last week. I was in touch with the organizer, and by Thursday, I did a talk. And it was just kind of wild. So recognize in that environment, lots of folks were on a mobile device, which really surprised me. And this was me learning more about the world. And there were 150 folks, and for the first time, I was within a richly diverse audience. And this is really the good and fun part about navigating these turbulent times. There are hopeful things to look forward to. And I just want to acknowledge, I know you're like, okay, it's a one-person company. I don't have any of the leadership. I don't have any of the challenges of communicating or getting people to change their minds, et cetera. That's all true. But the real cool thing that I had going for me is over the last 30 years, I've been building relationships with folks all over the world. I have built relationships with product leader peers everywhere. And this fast transition to go to 37 talks really in the last 2 months was enabled by all those partnerships. And this is where I nicely say it takes a village. So you can see Mathilde and Seb on the right. Lauren Weinstein is a pal. She was an earlier talk. That's Damon up top. Who helps me with my slides, thank God. And Toby is in the bottom. Anyway, so this is my new world. And I'm just reinforcing the importance of reaching out and building that community of peers. Because we're all going through the same thing, and we can learn so much from each other. And I hope you like the speed dating, the kind of chat roulette that happened today. All right, so some notes. This is all about navigating this place from at the beginning, can you survive it, to how might I thrive? And I've just learned in talking with lots of different companies, there is a process. So at the beginning, and it goes from reject, like that was me in the middle of the night with Kristen at 2 a.m, like this ain't happening, to then eventually, as you go through this process, you begin to reimagine the world. So this is what the process looks like. And to acknowledge that all people are going through this process at a different pace, and just to be understanding of where each person is. And the rejection, this is me at 2 a.m, like, no, I got to do the workshop. And then the emotional reaction, that was the recall to home. I mean, there wasn't a lot of thought and care put into that. And then over time, you have the time to respond. And for most companies today, it's about lengthening the runway, of acknowledging, most companies have had to do a layoff or let go of 10 or 20% or furlough 10 or 20% of their employees to create the opportunity for the company to survive. And then the cool thing is things are going to get better. And the companies that are sort of leaning forward are beginning to try to guess when the rebound will happen. And I could see in the earlier poll, there's radically different ideas about when the world's going to get almost normal. And it ranges from one end to the other. But you begin to plan for what that recovery might be. And then the cool thing is you begin to reimagine what life will be like. I think most of us have said, commuting sucks, and maybe I'm not commuting as much. Or in my notion, I was trying to become more worldly and visit 10 countries. And I'm like, holy moly, I've visited 40 countries in the last month. And you begin to reimagine what the world might look like. And there's some cool things once you emotionally can get yourself to that place. All right, so I told you in this third and final chapter that I was going to talk about what you can do as a leader to navigate crises like these better. So the word of the year is unprecedented, right? So I just want to acknowledge how bad and challenging this is for everyone. Incredibly high risk. Okay, so for me, I'm a 58-year-old with asthmatic. I'm a high-risk group. I've got 83-year-old parents living in a senior community, and then I've got to worry about my 22 and 24-year-old daughters, one of whom is in New York. Ooh, this is scary. And then there's a very high level of uncertainty. What's going to happen? And then there are unclear solutions. Should you wear masks or not? How do you reopen an economy? Or should you be doing that? It's just clear as muck. And the wild thing, certainly in my experience, was how quickly this life changed. It was the speed, the scale, and the magnitude of the change. Just wild. So acknowledge that for everyone. And then the leadership challenge, I have a variety of continuums that I'm going to share with you. And this is so hard to navigate, okay? So the first thing is there's this incredible range of human experience and emotion. If I ask people, where they are on a continuum from extremely stressful to not at all stressful, it goes across the board. So just first acknowledge that everybody's having a different experience and it's born of different emotion. And then your job as a product leader, you sort of have to keep those two ambivalent thoughts in your head at all times. On one hand, as a leader, you need to accept reality, but you also have to hold a piece of your mind that imagines a more optimistic future. And this is hard to do. You have someone who comes to you and says, hey, I'm about to buy a house. Is this the right time? Can I afford my mortgage? Am I going to be out of my job? Like, what do you say to that person, right? This is hard. This is part of the leadership challenge. Or connected, as a leader, you're supposed to have the answer for everything. And in turbulent times, it's just hard to know. And the humility is occasionally just saying, gosh, I don't know. And this is an incredibly hard thing to navigate. And then another is I typically try to provide leadership through context. I'll do storytelling, how to think about, moving across the bay. But sometimes the context, the downside is stuff doesn't happen as quickly. And that's the other side. Sometimes you just have to exert control. So when working with startups, I'm like, you have to give me a plan that's going to cut your spending by 20% by next week. I need to see it. Because there are things that people just don't like to do. And in this case, you don't have time to procrastinate. So these are all hard things. At the very least, be empathetic to the CEO of your company, because it's really a balancing act. And the main thing that I've learned is you sort of have to be you through this. You have to communicate and talk in ways that resonate with you. Now, the good news for all of us is we're in technology. And because of that, we can continue our work. There's lots of tools to work remotely. And you've been hearing those discussions all day long. It's viable, it's feasible. Whereas, imagine you're a carpenter or a fisherman. I mean, there's a zillion people in the world that are in worse shape than us. And you're incredibly accustomed to uncertainty. We all are inventing the future, and it's uncertain. And then most of us have an entrepreneurial streak. And so we've got this sort of innate optimism, and these are all the good things. And then here's the interesting thing that I have found. One of my biggest challenges as a leader is inspiring change. And I call it this phenomenon of big ship, small rudder. So the company gets bigger and bigger. It's way big, but it still has that teeny little rudder to help it steer. And it develops momentum. And I find it very, very hard to take big ships and encourage them to change, to turn. And in this case, it's easy. The crisis inspires change. It motivates this intense urgency, and it also motivates focus. And I've been trying to unleash that and harness this. And so this is some of the good news in the pandemic. Look out for it. Be open to it. All right, so some keys to navigating from survive to thrive. So I spent a lot of time saying, just what my wife said to me, that was then, this is now. And folks say, but we had a plan. Like I know that was then, this is now. So take them through the reject and react and into the respond phases as quickly as you can. And then because the world is so unknown and uncertain, you have to sort of think back to punk startup days where nothing is really known. And the best thing you can do in that environment is accelerate the cadence of the learning and of the experimentation, because it's game time for navigating the unknown. And I have this model for creative work. I call it the TURF model. It spells something. You need time, to make neat things happen. You need time, but you also need urgency. You need something that's motivating you to do stuff. And you need repetition to learn quickly. And then you need focus. And the cool thing in this model is the urgency's never been higher. And I'm nicely encourage you to learn quickly through repetition. And frankly, the focus need is intense, because you need to be in this mindset where you're doing ruthless prioritization. Typically you have 15 things that the company needs to do. And now you're like, nope, we're just going to do these 5. And that's the mindset that you have to navigate these periods of change. And then as a leader, it's all about building trust. And the main thing in navigating all those continuums I gave, the optimism versus reality, is you build trust as a leader through persistent, like timely updates. And then authentic communication. You need to be you, and you need to navigate those changes in a way that are consistent with you. Because folks can spot acting, and they can spot sales a mile away, especially in turbulent emotional times like today. And then given the uncertainty, you have to do lots of scenario planning. I think stuff is going to rebound in July. Well, what if it's June, or what if it's December? And that's what scenario planning looks like. And you just have to encourage the whole organization to have an incredibly flexible mindset, given all the uncertainty in front of you. So my tips here is just, at the end of the day, leaders lead, and I encourage you to be a leader. Today, it's a little bit different. The first thing I say is, as a leader, you need to be human. And most of the time, I'm encouraging maniacal focus and people sticking their heads down. But in this case, you have to stick your head up, and you have to think about your role in society, in the community. You have to think about the range of emotion and experience that people were going through. The 28-year-old engineer that you thought was just delighted to be working uninterrupted from home, but then it turns out that he doesn't have his own space because he's living in an apartment with 8 other dudes, right? And really verklempt. Or a 33-year-old head of marketing who's out in an urban area and is just lonely. And so this is the first time where your responsibility as a leader is simply to be human. And then you need to be realistic. We've talked about this. And then you're expected to hold optimism in your head as well. And that's needed. And then you need to be decisive, right? Like this was Kristen forcing a decision on me at 2 a.m. And that is incredibly helpful in building that high cadence learning to navigate turbulent times. And then you do need to be bold. I mean, the reality is something like 20% of companies are going to go out of business in the next few years. And it hurts me to even say that. So navigating the future is going to require some degree of boldness and openness to real and fundamental change, because that is going to happen. I'll bring you home with a juicy quote. It's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It's the one that is most adaptable to change. And I think this is going to be the real key for all of us as leaders in the industry to navigate the change. So I have a couple last thoughts to bring you home. I want you to imagine that it's 2030, 10 years from now, and someone asks you a very simple question. What did you do during the 2020 pandemic? Did you practice leadership every day? Because it's a practice art. What would I do if? Did you build your community of peers? It's probably the most helpful thing you can do to increase your pace of learning. Everyone is going through this together and can give helpful notes that'll really be impactful. That's been the story of my career. And then how do you want to be remembered? Because these are memorable times there's a huge opportunity for all of us to create impact in our towns, in our companies, in our organization, in our countries. Because remember, at the end of the day, leaders lead. And this is a wonderful opportunity to practice and exert that. And this is me with my community of product leaders. I bring 120 product leaders together every September. And this has been one of the most joyful parts of my product leadership career. So with that, I say thank you. I purposely got a Stranger Things motif. It's truly strange times. And if you know me, I'm not quite done. At the end of every talk, sometimes I feel like I'm a street performer, right? Here's somebody literally blowing fire, and you can see the crowd around that person. And then they do this incredibly stupid thing. They pass the hat. And you've done this, I've done this. You sort of skulk away because you don't want to pay. I'm passing the hat right now, but I'm not asking you for money. I would love, 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 love your feedback. And so I try to make it easy. You can hold up your phone using your camera app, and the QR code will automatically pop up a SurveyMonkey link. And it's going to ask a simple question. On a scale of 0 to 10, how likely are you to recommend this talk to a friend or colleague? 0 sucks, and 10 is great. You can pick any number on that scale you want. And then I've asked you a question. What was one thing that's good about this talk and one thing that could be better? And this is my 308th survey result. And this is how I learn. This is how I do that high cadence and pace of learning. Now, if you have an Android device and with a Lollipop, it didn't work. This is the same QR code as before. But you can go to www.gibsonbiddle.com. There's a link waiting for you at the top of the site. I don't advertise there. I don't capture email. Nothing bad will happen to you. But there's a link waiting, and it'll take you to a link to do the survey. I've also enabled a PDF of the presentation. So it's just sitting there waiting for you. And I also wrote an article for you called Leaders Lead. And it's sitting and waiting for you on Medium. And with that, I truly am finished. As we embark on these strange times with some mix of realism and optimism. Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you so much, Seb. Thanks so much, Mathilde. It's just been a delight to be here today and to have an opportunity to talk with everyone here. So thanks so much. Peace out.